David Reynolds never imagined his name would appear on anything fancier than an oil change receipt. Yet there it was printed in elegant black script on cream-colored paper, an invitation to the Holloway Foundation's annual charity gala. He held it with hands that still smelled faintly of motor oil, staring at the embossed crest as though it might vanish if he blinked too hard. For a long moment he wondered if there had been some mistake. But the name was right there, his name not as an afterthought or tucked in small print, but written clearly as though he truly belonged. The letter had fallen from the pocket of his work shirt when he'd reached for a socket wrench. He'd been underneath a gleaming silver Mercedes, the kind of car whose owner never remembered his name between oil changes. Now sitting on a wooden stool in the corner of Thompson's Auto Repair, David turned the invitation over in his calloused hands, trying to make sense of it. The Holloway Foundation was the stuff of newspaper headlines and charity balls. It wasn't meant for men who scraped grease from beneath their fingernails each night. A chill October breeze swept through the open garage door, carrying the scent of rain and fallen leaves. David tucked the invitation into his back pocket and returned to the Mercedes. The car wouldn't fix itself, and Mr. Harrington would be calling in an hour, expecting it to be ready. Life didn't pause for cream-colored invitations or moments of confusion. It moved forward in the rhythm of wrenches, tightening bolts, and invoices being printed. That was the world David understood. That evening, the small two-bedroom apartment welcomed him with familiar comfort. The scent of microwave macaroni and cheese hung in the air, and the sound of pencil against paper drifted from the kitchen table. Lily sat hunched over her homework, dark hair falling in waves around her face. At 11, she already carried herself with a quiet determination that reminded David so much of her mother it sometimes stole his breath. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots as he approached. Lily looked up, her eyes brightening. Math homework tonight. The numbers and symbols covered the page in neat rows, far more advanced than what David remembered from his own school days. Lily shrugged as if the complex equations were nothing special. Just some fraction problems. Do you want to check them? David hung his jacket on the back of a chair that wobbled on one leg. He'd been meaning to fix that for months now. Of course I'll check them. Just let me wash up first. In the small bathroom, he scrubbed at the oil stains embedded in the creases of his hands, a permanent reminder of his trade. The mirror reflected a face weathered beyond its 38 years lines, etched around eyes that had seen both joy and unbearable loss. 5 years since cancer had taken Sarah, 5 years of raising Lily alone, of learning to be both mother and father to a girl who deserved so much more than what he could provide. The invitation weighed in his back pocket. He pulled it out, reading it again under the harsh bathroom light. The Holloway Foundation cordially invites David Reynolds to attend our annual scholarship gala. The words seemed to belong to another world, one with crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, not mismatched plates and secondhand furniture. Back in the kitchen, Lily had abandoned her homework and was rummaging through the refrigerator. David leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She had Sarah's eyes, intelligent, observant, missing nothing. I got an invitation today to some fancy charity event, the Holloway Foundation Gala. Lily froze a carton of milk suspended in her hand. Her expression shifted from surprise to something more complex, a mixture of guilt and excitement. Her voice came out smaller than usual. Was it in a cream envelope with a gold seal? The question caught David off guard. Yeah, it was. How did you know that? Lily set the milk on the counter, her movements suddenly careful, measured. She disappeared into her bedroom without a word, returning moments later with a folder clutched to her chest. I was going to tell you, she said. I just wanted to wait until everything was finalized. The folder contained a letter on the same cream-colored paper as the invitation. Congratulations, it began. We are pleased to inform you that Lily Reynolds has been selected as a recipient of the Holloway Foundation Excellence Scholarship. David's eyes moved over the words, understanding dawning slowly. The scholarship would cover Lily's tuition at Westridge Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in Portland, for the next 7 years from now, through high school graduation. Why didn't you tell me about this? David's voice carried no anger, only confusion. The application process must have taken weeks, months even. Forms, essays, interviews, all without his knowledge. Lily's chin lifted slightly, a gesture reminiscent of Sarah when she'd made up her mind about something. I didn't want you to worry about the extra costs, the uniform, the supplies, the transportation. I knew you'd figure out a way to make it work, but you already work so hard, and I just... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. David understood. His daughter had been protecting him, trying to spare him the anxiety of additional expenses. The realization sat heavy in his chest, both pride in her independence and a quiet sorrow that she felt she needed to shield him from financial worries at such a young age. Ms. Peterson helped me with the application. Lily continued, referring to her fifth-grade teacher, and I had to do 3 interviews. The last one was with Mrs. Holloway herself. She asked about my interest in astronomy, and I told her how we watch the stars from the roof sometimes. David felt a surge of pride mixed with something else, a sense that his daughter was already moving into spaces he couldn't follow. Spaces with thick carpets and oil paintings on the walls where people like him arrived to fix the heating or change light bulbs, then disappeared without leaving a trace. So that's why they invited me to this gala thing. Because you won the scholarship. Lily nodded, relief washing over her features now that the secret was out. It's to honor the scholarship recipients and their families. There will be 5 of us this year. Mrs. Holloway said it's important to celebrate achievement. David looked again at the invitation. The event was in 2 weeks at the Grand River View Hotel downtown, the kind of place where valet parking cost more than what he earned in an hour. The thought of walking into that ballroom surrounded by wealth and privilege made his shoulders tighten, as though the very suit he would have to borrow would strangle the air out of him. I don't think I should go, Lily. He set the invitation on the table next to the homework she'd been so diligently completing. These kinds of events aren't really for people like me. You know that, right? I wouldn't fit in, wouldn't know what to say or how to act. I'd just embarrass you. Lily's expression felt disappointment etching across her features. But I want you there. I told Mrs. Holloway all about you, how hard you work, how you help me with my homework, even after 12-hour shifts. The scholarship is as much because of you as because of me. David ran a hand through his hair, feeling trapped between his daughter's expectations and the reality of his place in the world. He had no tuxedo, no polished shoes. He had no easy conversation about stocks or vacations in Paris. The idea of walking into that room felt like setting himself up for humiliation. But Lily looked at him with that knowing gaze of hers, older than her years, as if she could already hear the excuses forming in his throat. She pushed the envelope back toward him and whispered, "Dad, you deserve to be there. They should see who I'm working so hard for." Her voice carried no doubt, only faith, and it struck him in a place deeper than pride. That night, after she had gone to bed, David sat at the kitchen table with the invitation spread before him. Through the thin walls of the apartment, he could hear the muffled sounds of their neighbors, a television too loud, a baby crying, the bass thump of music from the floor above. This was his world, not marble staircases or chandeliers. He thought about the sacrifices, the years of patching holes in Lily's school clothes, the morning spent driving her across town before the shop opened. He thought about how her eyes had shone when she spoke of becoming an astrophysicist, of reaching for the stars, and he realized he couldn't let his own fear dim that light. So he decided he would go, not to impress anyone, not to pretend he was something he wasn't, but to stand in that room for Lily, to show her that her father belonged anywhere her dreams could take her. Even if the suit hung loose on his shoulders, even if his shoes never gleamed like theirs, he would go because she believed in him, and sometimes that was more than enough. The next morning, David called his friend Marcus, who worked at a bank downtown. "Listen, I need to borrow a suit, something nice enough for a fancy charity event." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "You at a charity event? That's a first. What's the occasion?" David explained about Lily's scholarship and the invitation to the gala. Pride swelled in Marcus's voice. "That girl of yours is going places, man. Always knew she was special. Of course you can borrow a suit. I've got a navy blue one that might fit you. I wore it to my cousin's wedding a few years back. It might be a bit loose now, lost some weight since then." Relief washed over David. "Thanks, man. I owe you one. Just trying to do right by Lily, you know." Marcus's voice softened. "Sarah would be proud, Dave. Of both of you." The mention of Sarah's name sent a familiar ache through David's chest. Even after 5 years, the loss of her felt like a physical wound that refused to fully heal. "Yeah, I hope so. Listen, I got to get to work. I'll swing by this weekend to pick up the suit." The days leading up to the gala passed in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and late nights helping Lily with science projects. The invitation remained on the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like Saturn, a birthday gift from Lily 2 years ago. Every time David passed it, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. What was he thinking agreeing to go to an event like this? He didn't belong in that world. Never had, never would. But then he'd see Lily studying at the kitchen table, her face tight with concentration, and he'd remember why he'd said yes. Not for himself, but for her. Because she deserved to see her father standing tall in a room where she was being honored, not shrinking away because he felt unworthy. The weekend before the gala, David drove to Marcus's apartment to pick up the suit. His friend lived in a better part of town in a building with an elevator and a doorman who nodded politely as David passed. The contrast between this place and his own apartment complex with its cracked concrete walkways and perpetually broken vending machines wasn't lost on him. Marcus opened the door with a grin, already holding a garment bag. He held it out like a peace offering. It's a bit old-fashioned, but it should do the trick. I've thrown in a tie too dark blue with some subtle pattern. Nothing too flashy. David took the bag, grateful but uncomfortable. This whole thing feels wrong, Marcus. Like I'm trying to be something I'm not. Marcus's expression softened. You're being a father who shows up for his kid. There's nothing fake about that. The suit's just a costume, man. What matters is who's wearing it. Later that night, David hung the suit in his bedroom closet where it stood out among his flannel shirts and worn jeans like a foreign object. He unzipped the bag to examine it more closely. The navy fabric was good quality, though slightly dated in style. It would hang loose in some places and pull tight in others. His shoulders were broader than Marcus's, his waist thicker from physical labor rather than gym sessions. Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight of the suit. You're going to look so handsome, Dad. Her smile was worth every moment of discomfort he would endure. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of nervous energy that clung to David's chest like a weight he couldn't quite shake. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tugging at the shoulders of the borrowed suit. It sagged in places and pulled in others, but it was pressed clean, and for David, that would have to be enough. He had polished his one pair of dress shoes until they shone as best they could, though the leather still bore the lines of years gone by. Every detail reminded him of the gap between his world and the one he was about to step into. Yet he kept going because Lily's words still echoed in his mind. They should see who I'm working so hard for. He dabbed a touch of cologne that his neighbor Mrs. Winters had insisted he borrow, then straightened his tie, which felt foreign against his throat. His hands, calloused and scarred from years under the hoods of cars, fumbled slightly with the knot, but eventually he managed something passable. When he looked at his reflection, he didn't see a polished gentleman or a man meant for chandeliers. He saw Lily's father, and that was enough to square his shoulders before walking out of the bathroom. Lily was waiting in the living room wearing the purple dress she usually saved for special occasions at school. Her hair was pulled back with a silver clip that had been her mother's, and her eyes shone with excitement. You look perfect, she said with such conviction that for a moment David almost believed her. Mrs. Winters from next door would be staying with Lily for the evening. The older woman arrived right on time, waving away David's thanks and shooing him toward the door. Go on now, she said. Make that girl of yours proud. Though if you ask me, she already is. The drive to the Grand Riverview Hotel was quiet. The hum of his old pickup truck filled the night air as the city lights blurred past. David found himself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white against the worn leather. The truck itself was another reminder of the divide, a 1998 Ford F-150 with rust creeping along the fenders and a heater that worked only when it wanted to. He parked 2 blocks away, not wanting the rust on his fenders to be the first thing anyone noticed. For a moment, he sat in the driver's seat, breathing deeply, gripping the steering wheel, as though letting go meant stepping into a world where he didn't belong. Then he thought of Lily waiting at home, her face pressed against the window, as she whispered to herself that her dad was brave enough for this. That was enough to push open the door and walk into the cool Portland night. The Grand Riverview Hotel loomed ahead, glowing like a palace. Its marble steps glistened under golden lights, and luxury sedans lined the curb as valets in crisp uniforms hurried to open doors. Women in gowns that shimmered like jewels glided up the staircase, men in tuxedos beside them as though they'd rehearsed the ritual their entire lives. David stood for a moment on the sidewalk, feeling the unfamiliar sting of comparison. His suit was too big, his shoes too worn, his steps too heavy, and yet he reminded himself he wasn't here to fit in. He was here because of Lily. He climbed the steps slowly, every footfall echoing louder in his own ears than it did on the marble. The doorman gave him a polite nod, though his eyes lingered a moment too long, as if assessing whether he belonged. David returned the nod with steady calm, refusing to shrink. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and the sharp scent of polished wood, the sound of laughter rising like a practiced symphony. Crystal chandeliers hung above scattering light across the ballroom entrance, where waiters in white gloves moved with the ease of dancers. David paused at the threshold, drawing in a long breath. He was out of place here. Anyone could see it. But beneath the weight of that truth, there was another stronger one. His daughter had earned her seat at this table, and by extension, so had he. No whispered judgment or sidelong glance would take that away. With his head lifted and his jaw set, he stepped forward into the glow of the ballroom. Every instinct told him he didn't belong, but every beat of his heart reminded him why he was here. Not for himself, not for the glittering stage or the champagne towers. He was here because of love, because Lily believed in him, and for her, he would walk into any room, no matter how foreign, no matter how bright. The moment David crossed the threshold into the ballroom, he felt a shift. Everything glimmered, polished floors catching the light of cascading chandeliers, silver trays of champagne gliding effortlessly between clusters of guests, conversations rising and falling like waves on a shore he'd never walked before. To most, it was familiar, a dance they had rehearsed countless times. To David, it felt like stepping into another world. He tried to steady his breathing, to carry himself with quiet dignity. He offered a polite smile to the first couple he passed, a gentle nod of greeting. Their eyes slid over him like glass, pausing just long enough to confirm he was not someone worth remembering before turning back to their laughter. A group of men near the bar gave him a glance, followed by chuckles hidden behind their hands. He didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. To them, he was no guest. He was someone's driver, maybe a last-minute caterer who had wandered too far into the wrong room. Their stares pressed against him, testing whether he would falter, whether he would shrink beneath the weight of assumptions. But David did not shrink. He had stood in tougher rooms, school offices where bills outpaced paychecks, shops where customers doubted his skill because of his worn boots and oil-stained hands. He had learned long ago that dignity was not granted by others. It was carried from within. At the entrance, a woman with a tablet checked his name against the guest list. Her eyebrows lifted slightly when he gave it, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, gesturing toward a table near the center of the room. "You're at table 7. The scholarship recipients and their families are seated together this evening." David thanked her and made his way across the ballroom, acutely aware of every step, every eye that might be following his progress. Table 7 was draped in white linen, set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses that caught the light. 4 of the seats were already occupied, a couple in their 40s, with a teenage boy who must have been one of the scholarship recipients, and a woman in a simple but elegant black dress sitting beside an empty chair. He extended his hand politely, his voice steady, though quiet. "David Reynolds, my daughter Lily is one of the Holloway Scholarship students." The couple looked up briefly. The woman's smile was practiced but cool. "How lovely," she murmured before returning her attention to her husband. The man offered a clipped nod, then checked his phone. Their son at least had the decency to make eye contact, offering a genuinely friendly smile, before his mother whispered something in his ear that made him look away. The woman in the black dress, however, met David's gaze directly. "I'm Patricia Chen," she said. "My son, Kevin, couldn't be here tonight. He's at a science competition in Seattle. Congratulations to your daughter. These scholarships are life-changing." There was a warmth in her voice that suggested she understood something about standing in rooms where you didn't quite belong. David felt a small measure of tension ease from his shoulders as he settled into the chair beside her arm. For a brief moment, a wave of isolation swept through him, cold and uninviting. But then he pictured Lily, her bright eyes full of pride as she had watched him leave the house. He heard her voice again, soft but firm. "You deserve to be there, Dad." That thought steadied him like a hand on his shoulder. Around him, the room buzzed with talk of markets, vacations, and names spoken as though they carried currency. David listened but did not pretend to belong to those conversations. Instead, he carried himself with the same grace he had brought into every mechanic's bay, every parent-teacher meeting, every sleepless night when Lily needed comfort. Quiet, steady, unshaken. Yes, the stares lingered. Yes, the whispers curled like smoke at the edges of the room. But David sat tall, his presence deliberate. He was not there to prove himself to strangers who measured worth in cufflinks and pedigrees. He was there because Lily had earned her place, and if he had to sit alone in the middle of a crowded room, he would do it with dignity for her and for himself. Patricia leaned closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. First time at one of these events, the judgment can be suffocating if you let it. I've been coming to Holloway functions for years, and some of these people still look at me like I'm serving the drinks. David appreciated her candor. Is your son on the full scholarship too? There was no embarrassment in his question, only a shared understanding. Patricia nodded. Single mom teacher's salary. Kevin's been at Westridge for 3 years now. The education is worth every uncomfortable moment at these events. Trust me. Their conversation was interrupted by the gentle ring of crystal, someone tapping a glass at the front of the room. Attention shifted to the stage where a man in an impeccable tuxedo stood at a podium adorned with the Holloway Foundation crest. Ladies and gentlemen, he began voice-carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. Welcome to the 32nd Annual Holloway Foundation Scholarship Gala. Tonight we celebrate excellence, opportunity, and the bright futures we are helping to build. I'm Richard Thornfield, Chairman of the Holloway Foundation Board, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all this evening. David listened as Thornfield spoke of the Foundation's history of its commitment to identifying exceptional students from all backgrounds. The words were polished, delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. But beneath the practiced phrases, David sensed something hollow, as if the man were reciting lines without fully believing them. Before we continue with our evening's program, Thornfield continued, I would like to acknowledge our scholarship recipients and then their families. He gestured toward the tables where David sat. These young people represent the very best of the next generation, and we are proud to invest in their futures. A smattering of applause followed, perfunctory rather than enthusiastic. David felt eyes turning toward their table, some curious, others dismissive. He maintained his posture, neither shrinking nor attempting to look more impressive than he was. Beside him, Patricia did the same, her chin lifted slightly as if in defiance. As Thornfield concluded his welcome and invited guests to enjoy their dinner, servers appeared with the first course, a delicate arrangement of greens and seafood that looked more like art than food. David stared at the array of forks beside his plate, momentarily uncertain. Start from the outside and work your way in, Patricia whispered, noticing his hesitation. And don't worry, half these people were born knowing which fork to use, and the other half had to learn just like us. Her kindness eased some of the tension from David's shoulders. He followed her lead, focusing on the mechanics of the meal rather than the conversations flowing around them. The couple across the table spoke exclusively to each other, occasionally including their son, but never extending the dialogue to David or Patricia. It was as if an invisible wall separated their half of the table from the other. David sat among the glitter and chatter as though he were a shadow no one wished to notice. Yet he did not let the silence bruise him. When spoken to, he answered simply, never stretching the truth, never trying to outshine the room with stories that did not belong to him. His words were measured, grounded, and honest, and for some, it seemed disarming. In a place where voices rose to prove importance, his calmness felt strangely out of rhythm, like a quiet chord played in the middle of a loud symphony. He let others talk of investments and art collections, their sentences polished and rehearsed. He did not interrupt, nor did he pretend to understand a world that was never his. When a man at the neighboring table asked if he was in the automotive business, David smiled faintly and replied, I fix cars in a neighborhood garage. Been doing it most of my life. The man's eyebrows flickered upward, then he shifted his attention elsewhere. But David felt no shame. There was nothing lesser about honest work. His hands, scarred and strong, told a story of years spent building a life for Lily. And that was a story worth carrying, whether the people at that table chose to see it or not. In the middle of it all, he thought of his father, a man who had worked long hours in lumber mills, who came home with sawdust in his hair and fatigue in his eyes, yet never let hardship touch the dignity he carried. Dignity isn't something you wear, his father used to say. It's something you hold inside. No one can strip it off from you unless you hand it over yourself. David held to that memory like armor tonight. It was all he needed. He sipped only water, declining the wine offered with a gentle shake of his head, not because he feared it, but because he wanted his mind clear. Clear to remember that every breath he took in that grand ballroom was not for himself but for Lily. She had worked so hard, risen so high. And this evening was part of her story. By being here, by staying present, he was honoring her. His presence was his gift to her, a quiet statement that said, "I see you, I am with you always." The laughter around him sometimes landed sharp, as though aimed in his direction, but he chose not to let it pierce. He reminded himself that he had endured harder battles, nights spent wondering how to stretch a paycheck, mornings patching uniforms, so Lily would not feel out of place among her classmates. Compared to that, a ballroom full of whispered judgment was nothing. So he sat steady, shoulders relaxed, but unyielding, like a man who knew the weight of his worth, even if no one else in the room recognized it. He did not crave applause. He did not need validation. He only needed to carry himself with the same integrity he had carried into every hard day of his life. And in that quiet strength, there was a power no chandelier could outshine. David Reynolds might have been overlooked by most in that glittering hall, but he understood something vital. True presence was not about being the loudest or the richest. It was about standing firm, unseen if necessary, but never small. For Lily and for the promise of her future, he would sit in that chair with his dignity intact as though it were a shield no one could take away. The evening pressed on a current of polished laughter and calculated charm sweeping through the ballroom. But David stayed anchored in his quiet place, steady and still. He had learned long ago that sometimes the strongest thing a man could do was simply remain. Then, without warning, the rhythm of the room shifted. It began as a subtle hush, the kind of pause that ripples through a crowd when something or someone greater than the spectacle itself enters. Catherine Holloway had arrived. She didn't storm the ballroom, didn't command attention with loud gestures or forced grandeur. Instead, she moved with the effortless gravity of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Draped in a deep emerald gown that shimmered like polished glass, she walked with an elegance that was quiet yet unignorable. Conversations softened as she passed. Shoulders straightened, voices lowered. People leaned in, eager for a moment of her attention, as though the slightest smile from her could validate an entire evening. David noticed her the way everyone did, gradually, then all at once. He had heard the name Holloway whispered for years, always paired with words like fortune, empire, brilliance. She was the architect of the very foundation that had lifted Lily into a better future. Though from a distance, she had always seemed like a figure carved from marble, untouchable, unreachable. Yet here she was, flesh and breath, moving through the crowd like a conductor guiding a silent orchestra. There was something in her eyes. David noticed, a focused intensity that suggested she saw more than she revealed. She wasn't young, perhaps in her mid-40s, but she carried herself with a confidence that made age irrelevant. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, revealing a strong jawline and the kind of features that photographs never quite captured correctly, too alive, too present. He expected her to glide past, to give her warmth to those who lived in her orbit, those with titles and wealth. And she did polite exchanges, gracious nods, a laughter that soothed rather than dazzled. But then her gaze swept across the room, steady and unhurried, until it landed on him. David felt it before he understood it. Her eyes lingered just a heartbeat longer than courtesy required, just enough to mark the moment as deliberate. She didn't skim over him like the others didn't dismiss him with a polite glance. She held his gaze, and in that fraction of time, the ballroom shifted. She didn't smile for show, nor did she offer a grand gesture. Instead, Catherine gave him the smallest of nods, subtle, genuine, acknowledging. It was not charity, not curiosity. It was recognition. David returned the nod with the quiet respect of a man unaccustomed to being seen in rooms like this. For a second, the noise around them blurred. The chandeliers still sparkled. The violin still played, but none of it mattered, because in a room full of people who measured him by his suit and his silence, someone had finally looked past the surface. At his table, the shift did not go unnoticed. A woman tilted her head, confusion flickering across her painted smile. A man's posture stiffened, his expression faltering for just a moment, as though the rules of the evening had been rewritten without warning. After all, Catherine Holloway wasn't known for gestures without purpose. Her time, her attention, her very presence were currencies of their own, and she had just spent some on him. David lowered his gaze back to the water glass in front of him, calm and composed. But something within him stirred. It wasn't pride or triumph. It was something simpler, something rarer. The reminder that even in a place designed to make him feel small, dignity could be seen. And for the first time all night, he no longer felt invisible. Patricia leaned closer, her voice a curious whisper. Do you know her? There was no accusation in the question, only genuine surprise. David shook his head slightly. My daughter mentioned meeting her during their scholarship interview, that's all. Patricia sat back, a new respect in her expression. Whatever it was, that wasn't nothing. Catherine Holloway doesn't acknowledge people without reason. The air inside the ballroom had grown heavy, thick with perfume, and the hum of voices competing for space. David excused himself quietly from the table, slipping toward the tall windows framed by velvet curtains. The glass doors to the balcony stood ajar, letting in a cool breath of Portland night. He stepped outside, grateful for the stillness. The sound of traffic far below the city lights, stretching wide and unbothered like stars scattered across the earth. He leaned against the railing, glass of water in hand, letting the night cool his skin. For the first time since arriving, his shoulders eased. Out here, there were no chandeliers demanding posture, no whispers measuring his worth, just air open and honest, the kind he could breathe without hesitation. He didn't hear her footsteps, but he felt the shift when Catherine Holloway appeared. She moved into the dim light with the same unshakable presence she carried inside. Though here, without the crowd, it seemed softer. She folded her arms loosely, her eyes drifting toward the skyline. I needed to breathe. Her voice was lower, more human than the commanding tone she had used in the ballroom. It gets loud in there. David gave a short nod. Yeah, it does. For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't strained. It was the kind of pause that belonged, as if the night itself was giving them space. Then Catherine's gaze turned, studying him, not with curiosity, but with intent. You're Lily's father. It was almost a statement rather than a question. David's lips curved into a quiet smile. She's the best part of me. That made her smile too, not the polite kind she offered donors, but something warmer touched with understanding. I met her at the scholarship reception. She gave a speech about wanting to be an astrophysicist. She said you taught her to love the stars. David chuckled softly, eyes shifting upward to the night sky above the city. When she was little, I used to park the truck on clear nights, open the sunroof, and point out constellations. Told her every star had a story. Catherine stepped closer to the railing, her emerald gown brushing against the cool stone. And you gave her a story big enough to reach them. The words caught him off guard, not because they were grand, but because they carried weight. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the billionaire, not the figure who commanded rooms, but a woman whose eyes carried a burden he hadn't expected to see. She didn't speak of wealth or power. She spoke of children, of dreams, of something that sounded almost like regret. You don't seem like the typical charity foundation head. David said the words escaping before he could filter them. Instead of taking offense, Catherine's expression softened with something like relief. Most days I don't feel like one either. Her fingers traced the stone railing as if seeking something solid to ground her. The foundation was my husband's vision. He believed education could change everything, that talent existed everywhere, but opportunity didn't. When he died 3 years ago, I inherited not just his wealth, but his purpose. She spoke not like someone delivering a rehearsed story, but like a person sharing a weight they rarely put down. There was a vulnerability in her candor that David hadn't expected. This wasn't the Catherine Holloway from newspaper photos or charity announcements. This was someone else entirely, someone trying to fulfill a promise. That can't be easy, he said simply. Following someone else's dream, Catherine's gaze moved back to the city lights, distant now. It wasn't his dream alone. I believed in it too. Still do. But the foundation has changed since Thomas died. Some members of the board see these scholarships as, she paused, searching for the right word, investment opportunities, not lives to nurture. They want returns, metrics, success stories they can showcase in brochures. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing sight of what matters. David understood then why she had sought the quiet of the balcony, why she had acknowledged him in the ballroom. She was looking for something real in a room full of performance. The scholarship recipients weren't just names on a list to her. They were children with dreams that needed protecting. Like Lily, they stood together, two different lives, brushing against one another under the same sky. No titles, no expectations, just a father and a woman who understood what it meant to give everything for something bigger than yourself. The stars above didn't shine any brighter yet. David felt a shift inside. Quiet, but undeniable. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was respect. The kind that grows roots before it ever grows leaves. My late wife Sarah, David said after a moment, used to tell me that stars are ancient light. What we see tonight left those stars hundreds, thousands of years ago. Sometimes I think about that. When I'm with Lily, how everything I do now will keep traveling forward long after I'm gone. Her light, her future. How she'll carry parts of me I'll never see. Catherine turned to face him. Something new in her expression, a recognition of shared understanding despite their different worlds. That's what education should be. Not a transaction, but a legacy. Giving children the chance to create light that outlasts us. When they finally turned back toward the ballroom, the noise seemed sharper, the eyes more pointed. But neither of them carried the moment like a secret. It wasn't about hiding. It was about knowing that connection could be forged in the simplest of places, on a balcony, under a night sky, speaking of children and constellations. And that in its own way was enough to change everything. When David and Catherine stepped back into the ballroom, it was as if the air itself shifted, conversations dipped, eyes turned, and a ripple of curiosity swept across the room. People had noticed their absence. People always noticed when Catherine Holloway disappeared, and they noticed even more when she returned with him. At first it was a whisper. At one table, a socialite leaning close to her companion with a sharp glance in David's direction. Perhaps he's her next project, she murmured the words, carrying farther than she intended. Another guest added, maybe it's charity work. A scholarship father she wants to parade for sympathy. The tone was dressed in silk, but carried the edge of disdain. By the time David reached his seat, the whispers had multiplied, twisting into stories of their own. A tragic case, one man said with a faint smirk. She always did have a soft spot for lost causes. At another table, someone laughed lightly, suggesting Catherine was entertaining herself by stepping outside the lines. The speculation grew, feeding itself, because the truth that she had chosen to spend a few quiet moments with a man no one else saw was something they could not easily make sense of. David felt the weight of it, though no words were spoken directly to him. The stares lingered longer now, sharper, searching for cracks they could name. Laughter that had once been distant now sounded closer, coated in curiosity, sharper at the edges. But he did not flinch. He lowered himself into his chair, with the same calm he had carried all night, steady and deliberate, as though their whispers did not reach him. Patricia gave him a look of quiet admiration tinged with curiosity she was too polite to voice. When a woman at the neighboring table leaned in, her tone sweet, but her eyes calculating, she asked, so, Mr. Reynolds, how exactly do you know Mrs. Holloway? David met her gaze evenly, his voice calm and unembellished. We talked about our kids. The simplicity of the answer left her blinking, caught off guard. It was not the story she had expected. No scandal, no performance, just authenticity. Around the room, the murmurs swelled, trying to restore order, to reframe what they had just seen. Because if Catherine Holloway could pause for someone like David Reynolds, a man in a borrowed suit with calloused hands, then perhaps their hierarchy wasn't as secure as they believed. And that thought unsettled them more than they cared to admit. David, however, remained untouched by the storm he had stirred. He kept his shoulders relaxed, his gaze soft, his silence purposeful. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't reach for explanations. He didn't need to. His calm presence became its own quiet rebuttal to every whisper. The more he refused to bend, the more the room seemed to tilt. Catherine, from her place at the front, carried on as though nothing had happened. Yet her choice to acknowledge him had already rewritten the unspoken rules of the evening, and everyone knew it. For David, the moment wasn't about triumph or validation. It was about holding his ground, without anger, without apology, in a room built on appearances. He had nothing to prove, and that more than anything was what left them unsettled. The mechanic from Portland had not begged for their approval. He had not played their game. He had simply stayed true to himself, and that simple, steady truth was enough to make the glittering ballroom feel suddenly uncertain. The auction had always been the grand finale of the Holloway Foundation Gala. The moment when wealth became performance and status was measured not by presence but by the size of a bid. Velvet catalogs rested on every table, pages filled with promises of exclusive getaways, Priceless art and dining experiences only the elite could afford. Hands lifted with ease, numbers climbing higher and higher, each paddle a declaration, I can, therefore I will. David watched in silence. He had no paddle, no catalog. He was content to observe his glass of water steady in his hand. To him, this wasn't a stage for competition. It was simply a reminder of how far his world stood from theirs. He thought of Lily's math homework waiting at home, of uniforms patched and repatched with careful stitches, and he smiled faintly. He didn't need any of what they were bidding on. His treasure sat under his own roof. Then came the final lot. The auctioneer's voice carried across the ballroom, dramatic and deliberate. Our closing item this evening, a private dinner with Mrs. Catherine Holloway herself. An intimate evening at her estate filled with conversation, fine wine, and the chance to plan future endeavors with the founder of this very foundation. A hum of excitement swept the room. Chairs shifted, whispers rose, and in an instant, paddles shot into the air. 10,000, then 20, climbing fast. The numbers leapt as easily as the laughter. 50,000 reached without hesitation. To the guests, it was not about dinner. It was about access, about standing closer to the gravity that Catherine carried. But before the auctioneer could call the next bid, Catherine herself rose from her seat. The room fell still. Even the air seemed to pause. She didn't raise a paddle. She didn't smile for effect. She simply stood tall and certain and spoke with a clarity that cut through every whisper. I would like to make a change. The auctioneer blinked, caught off guard. The crowd shifted uneasily. Catherine's gaze moved unflinchingly toward David. Tonight, I would like to place the winning bid, not for myself, but for someone else. $100,000 paid directly to the foundation in the name of David Reynolds. If he agrees, I would like to share that dinner with him. The silence that followed was absolute. Forks stilled, glasses froze midair. The entire room seemed suspended in disbelief. David sat motionless, stunned, her words ringing in his ears. He hadn't misheard. She had spoken his name clearly with purpose in front of everyone. Eyes turned to him, sharp, curious, some laced with disdain, others with bewilderment. But Catherine did not waver. She did not soften the moment with a smile or an explanation. She simply waited. David felt every gaze press against him, waiting for him to stumble, to shrink. Instead, he rose slowly, adjusting the borrowed jacket on his shoulders. His expression was calm, his voice steady when it came. If that's truly what you want, then I'd be honored. A ripple spread through the ballroom, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Not because he had accepted, but because of how he had accepted, without apology, without theatrics, just a man standing in his truth, no smaller than anyone else in the room. In that instant, the balance shifted. The same people who had dismissed him as a mistake now sat in silence, unable to deny what had just happened. Catherine had rewritten the rules, and David had met her choice with dignity. The gala built on appearances had been turned on its head, and for the first time that night, every eye in the room was not on the chandeliers or the stage, or even Catherine. It was on him. The ballroom still hummed with stunned voices as guests began to file out, their whispers chasing one another like sparks in dry grass. Yet David walked with calm, each step measured, deliberate, the kind of walk that made people step aside without realizing why. Beside him, Catherine moved in silence, her presence as composed as ever, though her eyes carried a quiet weight. It wasn't until they reached the lobby, away from the chandeliers and the sharp scent of perfume, that she finally spoke. Her voice was lower now, stripped of performance. I hope I didn't put you on the spot tonight. It wasn't my intention to make things harder for you. David turned toward her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a gentle smile. You didn't. You just gave me a place I never thought I'd be invited to. For the first time that evening, Catherine's poise shifted. She studied him closely, searching his face for any trace of bitterness or pride, but found only sincerity. It disarmed her in a way wealth and power never had. You carry yourself like someone who doesn't ask for anything. David shrugged, not with regret, but with honesty. Most of my life I couldn't afford to, but that doesn't mean I've gone without. I've got Lily. That's worth more than anything in that room. They walked slowly toward the tall glass doors. The city lights beyond shimmered against the dark. Their conversation drifted easily to Lily, to the scholarship program, to the small things that carried the greatest weight. David told her about mornings spent driving his daughter across town before the shop opened, about the nights he'd stitched holes in her uniforms determined she would never feel different from her classmates. Catherine listened not with polite nods or distracted glances, but fully attentively as though every word mattered. She shared pieces of her own story of building something out of loss of remembering what it meant to fight for dignity when the world tried to measure her by other scales. In the quiet space of the lobby, away from the spectacle, their words began to weave something rare. Respect, understanding, not the kind built on titles or appearances, but on truth. David paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. What happened tonight? It wasn't about money. It wasn't about a bid. You reminded me that dignity doesn't come with a price tag. It's not up for auction. It's something you carry, whether anyone sees it or not. Catherine's lips curved into a smile, gentle and unguarded. And tonight you showed an entire room what that looks like. The doors opened, and the cool Portland night swept in, carrying with it the sound of distant traffic and the faint scent of rain. For David, it felt like a cleansing breath. He had entered the Grand Riverview Hotel as a man who expected to be overlooked. He was leaving not with trophies or applause, but with something far greater, the certainty that his worth had never depended on their approval. Before they parted ways, Catherine placed a hand lightly on his arm. There was something I didn't say in there, something I couldn't say in front of everyone. Her eyes held his, serious now. The foundation is changing, David. My husband built it to give real opportunities to children like Lily. But since he died, the board has been pushing for different priorities. Tonight was as much about making a statement to them as it was about anything else. David felt the weight of her words, understanding dawning slowly. So the dinner, the $100,000, it wasn't just about me. Catherine didn't look away, didn't soften the truth with platitudes. It was about you. But it was also about something bigger. I need people who understand what the Holloway Foundation was meant to be. People who see education as a right, not a privilege to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The honesty between them hung in the air. Neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply real. David nodded slowly. I understand, and I respect that you told me the truth. Her smile returned, touched with something like relief. Not many people in my world expect the truth. They prefer the performance. Her hand fell away from his arm. I'll be in touch about that dinner. And David, thank you for being exactly who you are tonight. As she turned to leave her emerald gown, catching the light from the hotel windows, David felt a strange mixture of emotions, respect, curiosity, and something he wasn't quite ready to name. Catherine Holloway was not what he had expected. She was both more and less than the figure he had imagined, more human, less untouchable, and infinitely more complex. The drive home was quiet, the old truck's engine a comforting rumble in the night. David replayed the evening in his mind. The stares, the whispers, the moment of connection on the balcony, Catherine's unexpected bid. None of it felt quite real, as if he had stepped into someone else's story for a few hours. When he pulled up to his apartment building, the lights were still on in his unit. Mrs. Winters must have waited up, despite his insistence that she didn't need to. As he climbed the stairs, he felt the weight of the borrowed suit on his shoulders, a costume he could now shed. Lily was asleep on the couch, a textbook open on her chest. Mrs. Winters sat in the armchair, knitting needles moving steadily in her weathered hands. She looked up as he entered, her eye bright with curiosity behind her thick glasses. Well, don't keep an old woman in suspense. How was it? David hung the suit jacket carefully over the back of a chair, loosening the tie that had felt like a noose all evening. It was something else. Lily's going to be thrilled when I tell her Mrs. Holloway remembers her. Mrs. Winters set her knitting aside, fixing him with a knowing look. Is that all? The news is already buzzing about Catherine Holloway, bidding on a mystery man at the gala. The society pages will be all over it by morning. David felt a jolt of surprise. The news, how could they possibly? Some young woman was live blogging the whole thing, Mrs. Winters explained, waving her phone. She follows all these high society events. The mechanic and the millionaire, she's calling it. Mrs. Winters' expression softened as she saw the concern crossing David's face. Don't worry, she didn't use your name. But people are curious. It's not every day someone like Catherine Holloway breaks protocol like that. The thought of becoming fodder for gossip columns made David's stomach tighten. This wasn't what he had wanted, attention, speculation. His life turned into entertainment for strangers. He had gone to the gala for Lily to honor her achievement, not to become part of a society scandal. Mrs. Winters must have read his expression. She patted his arm gently. "It'll blow over, dear. These people always find some new drama to obsess over. But I have to say you must have made quite an impression." After Mrs. Winters left, David gently woke Lily, guiding her sleepy form to her bedroom. She mumbled questions about the gala, but he promised to tell her everything in the morning. For now, she needed rest, and honestly, so did he. In the quiet of his own bedroom, David carefully hung up Marcus's suit, making a mental note to have it dry cleaned before returning it. He changed into worn sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, clothes that felt like his own skin after the foreign texture of formal wear. On his nightstand sat a framed photograph of Sarah, her smile bright against the backdrop of Mount Hood, her arms wrapped around a 7-year-old Lily. He picked it up, tracing the outline of her face with his finger. "You wouldn't believe the night I just had," he whispered to her image. "I think I might be in over my head." Sleep came fitfully, his dreams a strange mixture of ballrooms and balconies, of Catherine's emerald gown and Sarah's laughing eyes. When morning broke, he woke to the sound of Lily moving around the kitchen, the clatter of bowls, and the hiss of the coffee maker pulling him from troubled sleep. She was already dressed for school, her dark hair pulled back neatly, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Tell me everything," she demanded as soon as he appeared in the doorway, her eyes wanawa and eager. "Did you meet Mrs. Holloway? What was she like? Did she remember me?" David accepted the mug of coffee she thrust toward him, buying time to decide how much to share. "Yes, I met her. And yes, she definitely remembered you. She mentioned your speech about becoming an astrophysicist. Her face lit up when she talked about you." Lily beamed, pride radiating from her, and the gala. "Was it as fancy as we imagined?" "Fancier," David admitted, taking a sip of coffee. "Chandelier, champagne people, and clothes that probably cost more than our car. It was like stepping into another world." He told her about the ballroom, the dinner, the scholarship students, and their families. He mentioned Catherine's arrival and their conversation on the balcony, but he hesitated when it came to the auction, unsure how to explain what had happened without making it sound like charity or pity. Lily, however, wasn't about to let him stop there. "And then the news says Mrs. Holloway bid on someone at the auction. Was that true? Were you there for that part?" David nearly choked on his coffee. "You saw the news too." Lily held up her phone, showing a headline from a local Portland news site. "Holloway Foundation Gala ends with surprising twist." David took the phone, scanning the article with growing dismay. Though it didn't mention him by name, it described a scholarship parent who had caught the attention of the normally reserved Catherine Holloway and became the subject of the night's most talked about auction bid. The article was filled with speculation about who this mystery man might be and what might have prompted Catherine's unconventional action. Some sources suggested it was a calculated move to demonstrate the foundation's commitment to the families it served. Others hinted at a more personal connection. Either way, the story had clearly captured public interest. Dad, Lily's voice pulled him back. "Was it you?" David handed the phone back, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Yeah, it was me, but it's not what it sounds like. Mrs. Holloway is trying to refocus the foundation on its original mission, helping kids like you. I think she was making a point to the board members and donors more than anything else." Lily's eyes narrowed, not entirely convinced. "So she bid $100,000 just to make a point?" "It's complicated, sweetheart." David ran a hand through his hair, still mussed from sleep. "She told me the foundation has been changing since her husband died. Some people want to take it in a different direction. I think she's fighting to keep it true to what it was meant to be." Lily considered this, her sharp mind turning over the implications. "So she used you to send a message." There was no accusation in her tone, just the clear-eyed assessment of a child who had learned early that adult motives were rarely simple. David nodded slowly. "Maybe. But I think it was more than that, too. I think she genuinely wants to understand families like ours better. That's what the dinner is supposed to be about." Lily's face brightened. "So you're really going to have dinner with Catherine Holloway?" At her house, the excitement in her voice made David smile despite his concerns. "That's the plan, though I'm not sure when." Lily launched into a flurry of questions about what he would wear, what he would say, whether he could ask about the foundation's future plans for the scholarship program. Her enthusiasm was infectious, momentarily pushing aside his unease about becoming the subject of public speculation. But reality intruded as soon as he arrived at Thompson's Auto Repair. His co-workers had seen the news too, and while they didn't know the full story, they'd pieced together enough to guess that David had been at the gala. Mike, the senior mechanic, whistled low as David walked in. "Look who's here," Portland's mystery man himself. Heat rose in David's face, but he kept his expression neutral as he hung up his jacket. "I was just there for Lily's scholarship thing. Nothing to make a fuss about." But curiosity couldn't be so easily deflected. Throughout the morning, questions filtered in between oil changes and tire rotations. What was the gala like? Had he really met Catherine Holloway? Was it true she'd singled him out somehow? David answered minimally, focusing on his work, trying to maintain the boundary between his private life and his workplace. By lunchtime, his phone had begun to buzz with texts from friends who'd seen the news. Marcus was particularly insistent, demanding to know if the guy in my suit was the same one mentioned in the society pages. David replied with brief assurances that everything was fine, that the situation had been blown out of proportion, that there was nothing to worry about. But as the day wore on, a gnawing anxiety took root. What if reporters tracked him down? What if they showed up at Lily's school? What if this brief moment in the spotlight affected her scholarship somehow? The thoughts chased one another, growing larger with each circuit. When his phone rang with an unknown number, his heart skipped. For a moment, he considered not answering, but professional habit won out. David Reynolds speaking. "Mr. Reynolds," the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, feminine. "This is Andrea Marsh, Mrs. Holloway's personal assistant. I'm calling to arrange the dinner that was part of last night's auction." David stepped outside the garage, away from the noise of pneumatic tools and the curious ears of his coworkers. "Of course, I wasn't sure when that would happen. Mrs. Holloway would like to suggest this Friday evening if that's convenient for you. 7 o'clock at her residence in the West Hills. I can arrange transportation if you'd prefer not to drive." The offer, though practical, stung slightly. Did Catherine think he couldn't find his way to her neighborhood? Or was she concerned about his truck, parked among the luxury cars of the West Hills Friday Works? "And I can drive myself, thanks." There was a brief pause, as if the assistant was making a note. "Very good. The address is 4827 Skyline Boulevard. The gate code will be the last 4 digits of your phone number for ease of remembrance. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you might have concerns about the media attention from last night. She wants to assure you that her home is very private and the dinner will not be publicized in any way." The thoughtfulness of the arrangement, the personal gate code, the privacy assurance eased some of David's tension. "Thank her for me. Is there anything I should know about? Is there a dress code or something I should prepare for?" Another brief pause. "Business casual would be appropriate, Mr. Reynolds. And Mrs. Holloway asked me to tell you that this is not a formal foundation event, just dinner and conversation. She's looking forward to it." After the call ended, David stood in the parking lot, letting the October breeze cool his face. Just dinner and conversation. With one of the wealthiest women in Portland, in her West Hills mansion. Nothing to be nervous about at all. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. The news cycle moved on as Mrs. Winters had predicted, but David still felt the weight of curious glances whenever he ventured beyond his usual routines. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even at Lily's school when he picked her up for a dentist appointment, it seemed as if everyone had seen the story everyone was wondering. By Friday morning, his anxiety had crystallized into a dull headache that pulsed behind his eyes. He moved through his workday, mechanically focusing on the familiar problems of engines and transmissions, grateful for their straightforward solutions. That afternoon, his coworkers presented him with a gift, a new button-down shirt, deep blue with a pattern subtle enough to be professional, but distinct enough to stand out. "We took up a collection," Mike explained, unusually gruff. "Figured you might want something nice for your fancy dinner. Not that your stuff isn't nice, but, you know." The gesture left David momentarily speechless. These men who worked alongside him, who rarely expressed anything more emotional than frustration over a stubborn bolt or appreciation for a cold beer after work, had noticed his anxiety and responded with unexpected kindness. "Thanks, guys. This means a lot." He accepted the shirt, careful not to show how deeply the gesture had affected him. These were not men who would be comfortable with emotional displays. Mike clapped him on the shoulder, his way of saying that no further thanks were necessary. Just don't forget about us little people when you're hobnobbing with the elite. The joke broke the tension and David left work feeling lighter than he had all week. The shirt was a reminder that whatever happened with Catherine Holloway and her foundation, he had his own community people who saw his worth without needing to dress it up. At home, Lily hovered as he got ready, offering earnest advice about which shoes look best and whether he should wear a watch. "I still think you should let me come," she insisted for the third time. "I'm part of this too, and Mrs. Holloway already knows me." David smoothed down the new shirt, adjusting the collar. "This is about the foundation, Lily, about how they can better support families like ours. It's not a social visit." Lily's expression turned shrewd. "Are you sure? Because from what I read, it seemed pretty personal." David turned to face his daughter, recognizing the mixture of protectiveness and curiosity in her eyes. She had spent years watching him put her needs first, sacrifice his own comfort and desires for her future. Now she was old enough to worry about him in return. He knelt slightly, bringing himself to her eye level. "Listen to me. Mrs. Holloway is interested in the foundation's work. She wants to understand what families like ours need. That's all this is. I promise I'm not getting in over my head." Lily studied his face, searching for reassurance. "Just be careful, okay? These people, they're different from us. They have different rules." The wisdom in her young voice struck David like a physical blow. When had his daughter become so perceptive, so aware of the invisible barriers that separated their world from Catherine's? And why did it feel like she was seeing something he was missing? "I'll be careful," he promised, giving her a quick hug. "Mrs. Winters is coming over to stay with you. I won't be late." As he drove through the deepening twilight toward the West Hills, David found himself replaying Lily's warning. These people, they're different from us. They have different rules. Was he naive to think that his conversation with Catherine on the balcony had been genuine? That her bid had been about more than making a statement to her board? The West Hills rose before him, winding roads climbing toward views that commanded premium real estate prices. The homes here were set back from the street, hidden behind gates and hedges, their windows glowing with warm light against the darkening sky. This was old money, Portland, discreet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Skyline Boulevard curved along the crest of the hills, offering glimpses of the city spread below, like a carpet of light. David checked the address against his phone's GPS, slowing as he approached a driveway marked by tasteful stone pillars. He punched in the gate code, the last 4 digits of his phone number as promised, and watched as the wrought iron gates swung silently open. The driveway wound through carefully landscaped grounds, trees and shrubs creating natural privacy screens. The house itself appeared gradually a sprawling modernist structure of glass, stone, and steel that seemed to grow organically from the hillside. Lights glowed warmly from within, illuminating a structure that managed to be both imposing and somehow welcoming. David parked his truck near the front entrance, acutely aware of its age and humble appearance against the backdrop of such architectural elegance. He sat for a moment, gathering himself, remembering the dignity he had carried through the ballroom. Then he stepped out, straightened his new shirt, and approached the door. Before he could ring the bell, the door opened. Catherine stood in the entryway, no longer in an emerald gown, but in dark slacks and a simple cream-colored blouse. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her feet bare. The contrast between this Catherine and the one who had commanded the ballroom was striking. "David," she said, her smile genuine, "I'm glad you found the place without trouble. Please come in." The interior of the house matched its exterior, clean lines, natural materials, spaces that flowed into one another with an ease that belied their careful design. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of the city below, now twinkling in the early evening darkness. The furnishings were elegant but not ostentatious, comfortable rather than showy. Catherine led him through to a kitchen that would have made professional chefs envious, gleaming countertops, state-of-the-art appliances, an island large enough to serve as a prep area and casual dining space. "I hope you don't mind eating here, rather than in the formal dining room," she said, gesturing toward the island where places had been set. "It feels more honest somehow, less like a performance." David nodded, relaxing slightly at the informal setting. "This is perfect. The view alone is worth the drive up." Catherine moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, opening the oven to check on something that filled the air with the rich scent of herbs and roasting meat. I should confess something she said her back to him as she worked. I don't often cook for myself, let alone for guests, but tonight felt like an occasion for something genuine. I hope you like lamb. You cooked. David couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. He had assumed there would be staff caterers, someone else to handle the details. Catherine turned a wry smile playing at her lips. Don't sound so shocked. I wasn't born into all this, you know. My father was a high school principal in Eugene. My mother taught piano lessons from our living room. I didn't have a personal chef until I married Thomas, and even then I insisted on keeping the kitchen as my territory, at least some of the time. The revelation shifted something in David's perception. He had assumed Catherine was like the other guests at the gala, born to privilege, raised in luxury. The thought that she might understand something of his world, might have memories of a life before wealth, had never occurred to him. Wine, she offered, holding up a bottle. Or I have beer if you prefer. Real beer, not the pretentious craft stuff Thomas used to collect. David smiled, the last of his tension easing. Beer would be great, actually. They settled into a rhythm as Catherine finished preparing the meal, David helping where he could, setting out plates, opening the beer, finding serving spoons in drawers she directed him to. The awkwardness he had feared dissolved in the simple act of sharing a kitchen space, of working together toward the common goal of dinner. When they finally sat at the island plates before them, glasses filled, the atmosphere was relaxed in a way David hadn't dared to hope for. The lamb was perfectly cooked, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a grain he didn't recognize but enjoyed nonetheless. So Catherine began taking a sip of her wine. I imagine you have questions about the other night, about why I singled you out, about the bit, about all of it. David appreciated her directness. I do. But I also understand what you told me afterward about making a statement to your board about fighting for the foundation's original mission. What I don't understand is why, Mato, there were other scholarship parents there. What made you choose me to make your point? Catherine considered the question, her eyes thoughtful. When I was 17, my father took me to a fundraiser for the university where he hoped I'd study. It was the first black tie event I'd ever attended. My dress came from a consignment shop. My shoes were borrowed from a friend. She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. I spent the entire evening feeling like an imposter, waiting for someone to point at me and declare I didn't belong. No one did, but no one really saw me either. I was invisible in a room full of people. David nodded, understanding immediately. When I walked into the ballroom, you were the only one who actually looked at me. Not through me, not past me. At me. Exactly. Catherine's expression softened with memory. When Thomas and I started the foundation, one of our core principles was recognition, seeing the potential in students who might otherwise be overlooked, acknowledging the sacrifices their families make. But over the years, especially since Thomas died, that vision has blurred. The board members see the scholarship program as a transaction. Identified talent provide resources, expect returns in the form of success stories they can showcase to donors. They've forgotten that behind every scholarship is a family, a story, a life shaped by both opportunity and struggle. She set down her glass, her gaze direct now. I chose you, David, because when I looked at you, I saw someone who understood dignity in a way most of the people in that ballroom never will. Someone who could remind me why we started this work in the first place. The honesty of her answer caught David off guard. He had expected political calculation, strategic thinking. Not this raw admission of recognition, of seeing in him something she feared was being lost. What exactly is happening with the foundation, he asked after a moment. You mentioned about the board wanting changes. What kind of changes? Catherine's expression tightened slightly. 3 of the 7 board members want to restructure the scholarship program. Fewer full rides, more partial scholarships spread across more students. On paper, it looks like we'd be helping more families, but in reality, we'd be helping them less. Partial scholarships create the illusion of opportunity without addressing the full scope of need. Transportation, uniforms, supplies, extracurriculars, all the hidden costs that can make or break a student's experience. She pushed her plate aside, the food momentarily forgotten. The worst part is they're couching it in terms of sustainability and broader impact, making it sound like they're expanding our mission when they're actually diluting it. And they're gaining support. The vote is split 3-4 right now, with me holding the deciding vote as chair. But they're persistent, and frankly, they have connections to our biggest donors. David understood the predicament all too clearly. If the partial scholarships look good on paper and appeal to donors, you're fighting an uphill battle based on principles that are harder to quantify. Exactly. Catherine's eyes lit with appreciation for his quick grasp of the situation. I can talk about dignity and opportunity and the transformative power of education until I'm blue in the face. But at the end of the day, they want metrics, numbers, graphs that go up and to the right. They want to be able to say, we helped 500 students this year, instead of we changed 50 lives completely. And that's where I come in, David asked, the pieces falling into place. You want me to help make the case for quality over quantity, to put a face on what the full scholarship means for families like mine. Catherine nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes now. That was my initial thought. But I realize it puts you in an uncomfortable position. Using your story, your experience to fight my battle, it's not fair to ask that of you. The admission surprised David. He had expected her to press forward, to leverage his presence for her cause, without acknowledging the ethical complexity. Instead, she was offering him a way out, recognizing that her request carried a burden he hadn't asked for. What if it's a battle worth fighting, he asked quietly. Not just for you, but for kids like Lily, for families who need more than partial solutions. Catherine studied him, her expression unreadable. What are you suggesting? David leaned forward slightly, organizing his thoughts. What if I talk to some of the other scholarship families, get a sense of what the full ride has meant for them, what challenges they still face, what would be waste if the program changed real stories, real data, but from the perspective of the people actually living it. Not just my experience, but a broader picture that the board couldn't easily dismiss. A smile spread slowly across Catherine's face, genuine and appreciative. That's not at all what I expected you to say, but it's exactly what we need. The board doesn't listen to me because they think I'm too emotionally invested in Thomas's vision. But they can't ignore the voices of the families we serve, not without exposing their true priorities. The conversation shifted then, becoming more strategic, more focused. They discussed how to approach other scholarship families, what questions would yield the most insight, how to present the findings in a way the board couldn't easily dismiss. Catherine moved to a drawer, pulling out a notepad, jotting down ideas as they flowed between them. David found himself energized by the planning, by the sense that his perspective, so often overlooked in rooms of power, might actually make a difference. This wasn't charity, it wasn't performance. It was collaboration between two people who, despite their different circumstances, shared a fundamental belief in the power of opportunity. As the evening deepened, their conversation drifted from the foundation to more personal territories. Catherine spoke of Thomas, not the philanthropist, but the man who had brought her coffee in bed every morning, who had insisted on fixing leaky faucets himself despite having the means to hire any plumber in Portland, who had spent the last months of his life designing scholarship certificates because he wanted each recipient to have something beautiful to frame. David shared stories of Sarah, her determination to finish her degree, even as cancer treatments drained her energy, her insistence that Lily's college fund remain untouched, even when medical bills mounted her final request, that he promised to keep showing their daughter the stars no matter what. Grief wove through their words, binding them in unexpected ways. Not in its raw, fresh stages, but in its seasoned form, the grief that had been carried long enough to become part of the carrier, shaping priorities, clarifying vision, stripping away pretense. It was nearly midnight when David realized how late it had grown. The dishes had been cleared away hours ago, replaced by cups of coffee that had long since cooled. Catherine sat beside him now, rather than across, close enough that he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the single strand of silver in her dark hair. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "I promised Lily I wouldn't be late." Catherine glanced at her watch, surprise crossing her features. "I had no idea it was so late. I'm sorry to have kept you." "Don't be. This was—" Her eyes met his and something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps that whatever had begun on the balcony of the Grand Riverview Hotel had deepened tonight, had taken root in shared purpose and mutual recognition. As she walked him to the door, Catherine hesitated, her composure momentarily uncertain. "The board meets next Friday. If we're going to make a case for maintaining the full scholarship program, we'll need to work quickly. Would you be willing to meet again? Perhaps with some of the other scholarship parents if they're interested?" David nodded without hesitation. "Just tell me when and where. I'll make it work." Her relief was palpable. "Thank you, David, for tonight, for your willingness to help, for—" Her voice trailed off, but her eyes finished the thought. "For seeing me, not just the name or the fortune or the foundation." On the drive home, the city lights spread below him like fallen stars. David found himself replaying moments from the evening, the easy rhythm they had found in the kitchen, the way Catherine's eyes had lit when he suggested reaching out to other families, the shared understanding that had flowed beneath their words. It was not attraction, not precisely, or not only attraction. It was recognition of a kindred spirit found in the most unexpected place. Mrs. Winters was asleep in the armchair when he arrived home, her knitting needles still in her lap. He woke her, gently thanking her for staying late, assuring her that the evening had gone well. She studied his face with the keen observation of someone who had witnessed decades of human emotion. But she asked no questions, simply gathered her things and patted his arm before leaving. David checked on Lily, fast asleep with an astronomy book open beside her pillow. He carefully removed it, marking her place before setting it on her nightstand. In sleep, her face still held the roundness of childhood, a reminder that despite her precocious intellect, she was still his little girl, still in need of protection and guidance. The thought solidified his resolve. The work with Catherine wasn't just about principles or programs. It was about Lily and children like her who deserved champions willing to fight for their futures. If lending his voice to that fight meant stepping into uncomfortable spotlight, so be it. There were worse reasons to be noticed. The next morning, as Lily peppered him with questions about Catherine's house, about what they had discussed, about whether he had mentioned her, David found himself editing the truth. He told her about the dinner, about Catherine's background in Eugene, about the view from the hillside home. But he held back the details about the foundation's internal struggles, about the role he had agreed to play in advocating for the full scholarship program. Those complexities could wait until he had a clearer plan, until he knew exactly what he was asking of himself and potentially of her. Lily, however, was too perceptive to be entirely deflected. So it wasn't just a social dinner, she concluded, spreading peanut butter on her toast with methodical precision. "You're going to be working with her somehow." David sighed, recognizing the futility of hiding things from his observant daughter. "We're going to talk with some of the other scholarship families. Try to understand better what the program means to them, what challenges they still face. That's all." Lily nodded, absorbing this. "And will I get to help, since I'm actually the one with the scholarship?" The question gave David pause. He had been thinking of himself as Lily's protector, the buffer between her and the complexities of adult concerns. But she was right. She was the scholarship recipient, the one whose future was most directly affected by the foundation's decisions. Perhaps she deserved a voice in this conversation too. "Let me talk to Mrs. Holloway about it," he promised. "If there's a way for you to be involved that doesn't interfere with your schoolwork, we'll make it happen." Lily's face brightened, and in that moment, David glimpsed the young woman she was becoming, thoughtful, engaged, eager to shape her own path. The scholarship wasn't just opening doors to better education. It was giving her confidence, a sense that her voice mattered, that she belonged in conversations about her future. The thought warmed him as he headed to work, a counterbalance to the uncertainty that still lingered about his growing involvement with Catherine and her foundation. Whatever came next would be complicated, perhaps even difficult. But if it helped secure opportunities for Lily and students like her, it would be worth every uncomfortable moment, every step outside his familiar world. What he couldn't have anticipated as he drove through the October morning was how quickly those complications would arise, or how deeply they would test the connection he and Catherine had begun to forge. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that matched David's turbulent thoughts. Rain pelted the windshield of his truck as he drove Lily to school, the wipers struggling against the downpour. The weekend had passed in a blur of household chores and quiet conversations, punctuated by calls from Catherine as they coordinated their approach to the scholarship families. The plan had taken shape quickly. Catherine would provide a list of current scholarship recipients, and David would reach out to their parents, arranging informal meetings where they could speak freely about their experiences. Catherine would remain in the background for now, her presence potentially influencing what families might feel comfortable sharing. As they pulled up to Westridge Academy, Lily gathered her backpack, hesitating before opening the door. "Will you pick me up after school? I was thinking maybe I could help you call some of the other scholarship families." David studied his daughter's expression, eager, determined, so like Sarah when she'd set her mind to something. I'll pick you up, but let's hold off on the calls until we have a better plan. Mrs. Holloway and I are still working out the details. Lily's disappointment was visible, but she nodded, understanding the complexity beyond her years. Just don't shut me out, okay? This affects me too. The maturity in her voice struck David anew. When had his little girl grown so wise, I promise? No shutting out. We're in this together. As she dashed through the rain toward the school entrance, David felt a familiar ache pride mingled with the bittersweet recognition that she was growing up, moving steadily toward independence. The scholarship was accelerating that journey, opening doors that would eventually lead her beyond his world. It was exactly what he wanted for her, yet the prospect still hollowed something in his chest. At the shop, David moved through his morning routine mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He was halfway through an oil change when Mike appeared beside the car, holding out a folded newspaper. You might want to see this. The Portland Business Journal lay open to a small article near the back pages headlined, Holloway Foundation Board Tension Surface. David scanned it quickly, his stomach tightening as he read. The piece cited anonymous sources close to the foundation, claiming that Catherine Holloway was fighting to maintain her late husband's outdated vision against board members advocating for modernization and expanded reach. It mentioned the gala auction as a public display of the growing rift and suggested that Catherine was seeking allies outside the traditional philanthropic community. Though the article didn't name him directly, the implication was clear enough. David had become a pawn in a power struggle he was only beginning to understand. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. Was that all this was? Had Catherine's recognition on the balcony, her invitation to dinner, her apparent appreciation of his perspective, had it all been calculation rather than connection? No, he decided, handing the paper back to Mike. Their conversations had been too honest, too unguarded. Catherine's frustration with her board had been real, as had her commitment to maintaining the full scholarship program. If she was using him as an ally, at least it was in service of something he believed in too. But the article raised the stakes. What had begun as a private collaboration was now public, at least in certain circles. People were watching, speculating, taking sides. For Catherine, such scrutiny might be familiar territory. For David and Lily, it was uncharted and potentially dangerous ground. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Have you seen the Business Journal? We should talk. They arranged to meet for coffee that afternoon at a small shop halfway between the garage and the foundation offices. The rain had subsided to a steady drizzle by the time David arrived, the streets slick with fallen leaves and puddles that reflected the gray Portland sky. Catherine was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 mugs steaming before her. She wore a tailored coat over a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, professional yet understated, as if deliberately avoiding drawing attention. Her expression lightened as he approached, relief visible in the softening of her shoulders. I'm sorry about the article, she said immediately. I should have warned you this might happen. The board isn't above using the press to advance their agenda. David slid into the seat across from her, accepting the coffee she pushed toward him. Do they know about our plans? About reaching out to the scholarship families? Catherine shook her head. Not yet, but they're suspicious. Richard Thornfield, the chairman who spoke at the gala, called me this morning. He was fishing for information about you, about why I chose you for the auction bid. I kept it vague, but he's not stupid. He knows I'm up to something. She wrapped her hands around her mug, her wedding ring catching the light, a simple band, not the ostentatious diamond David might have expected. The board meeting is 10 days away. If we're going to present a case for maintaining the full scholarship program, we need to move quickly. But I understand if this publicity makes you uncomfortable. If you want to step back, I won't hold it against you. The offer was genuine. He could see it in her eyes and the careful way she held herself preparing for his withdrawal. But beneath the consideration, he glimpsed something else, hope fragile but persistent, that he would stay the course. David took a slow sip of coffee, buying time to organize his thoughts. I'm not backing out, but I need to understand what we're up against. Who exactly is pushing for these changes and why? What do they gain if the scholarship program shifts to partial funding? Catherine's expression darkened. 3 board members are driving it. Richard Thornfield, who you met at the gala. Eleanor Whitman, who inherited her seat from her father. And James Curtis, a tech entrepreneur who joined Bond last year. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. On the surface, they claim it's about sustainability and broader impact, but privately, it's about control and reputation. Full scholarships mean the foundation has fewer success stories to showcase to donors. Partial scholarships look better in annual reports, more students helped, more diversity metrics checked, more schools involved. And you think they'll use the press to pressure you? David gestured toward the folded newspaper on the table between them. Catherine's laugh held no humor. They already are. That article wasn't an accident. It was a warning shot letting me know they're prepared to make this messy if I don't fall in line. The cynicism of it all struck David hard. These were people entrusted with children's futures, with opportunities that could change lives. Yet they were treating it like a political game, moves and counter moves on a board where real people were just pieces to be positioned. Something of his disgust must have shown on his face because Catherine reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching his. I know. It's ugly. That's why I need your help. The board has forgotten what this is really about, families like yours, children like Lily. They need to be reminded. David nodded, his resolve hardening. Tell me what our next steps are. Over the next hour, they refined their strategy. Catherine provided a list of 15 scholarship families who might be willing to speak candidly. David would contact them, explaining the situation and arranging informal gatherings where they could share their experiences. Catherine would prepare a formal proposal for the board, incorporating their testimonies and data on the long-term impact of full versus partial scholarships. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Catherine hesitated, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal something more vulnerable. Thank you for sticking with this, despite the complications. It means more than I can say. David watched her walk away, her figure gradually blending into the crowd of downtown workers hurrying through the rain. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity he'd noticed at the gala, neither flaunting her status nor apologizing for it. In that moment, he realized that despite their different worlds, they shared something essential, a stubborn integrity, a refusal to be defined by others' expectations. The realization both comforted and unsettled him. Their alliance made sense. Their growing personal connection was more complex, fraught with implications neither of them had fully acknowledged. That evening, after explaining the situation to Lily in terms she could understand, David began making calls. The first few families were hesitant, wary of anything that might jeopardize their children's scholarships. But as he explained Catherine's position, her fight to preserve the full funding, they warmed to the conversation. Yes, they would meet. Yes, they would share their stories. Yes, they understood the stakes. By Friday, David had arranged 2 gatherings, one at a community center near Westridge Academy, another at the public library downtown. 12 families had agreed to participate, a diverse group united by the common thread of children whose educational opportunities far exceeded what their parents could have provided alone. Catherine had suggested that she remain in the background during these initial meetings, allowing families to speak freely without the pressure of her presence. But she would provide food, childcare, and a framework for the conversations to ensure they yielded the specific insights needed for her proposal to the board. The first meeting on Saturday afternoon exceeded David's expectations. Parents shared openly about the transformative impact of the full scholarships, not just the tuition coverage, but the comprehensive support that allowed their children to truly belong in elite educational environments. A father described working double shifts to afford the gas to drive his daughter to school each day, a cost not covered by the scholarship, but one he shouldered gladly knowing her future was secure. A mother spoke of learning to navigate parent-teacher conferences where she was the only person not wearing designer clothes, drawing strength from her son's academic achievements rather than material status. David recorded it all with permission, taking notes on recurring themes and powerful individual stories. Throughout the gathering, he felt a growing sense of community, of shared purpose that transcended the immediate issue of the foundation's funding model. These were families who understood sacrifice, who measured success not in dollars, but in opportunities secured for the next generation. As the meeting wound down, a woman approached David privately. Maria Santos was a single mother whose daughter had received one of the first Holloway scholarships 5 years earlier. "I've been watching you," she said, her expression thoughtful. "You're good at this, making people feel heard, drawing out what matters. But I have to ask, why are you doing it? What's in this for you?" The directness of the question caught David off guard. For Lily, he answered simply, "For kids like her who deserve every chance they can get." Maria studied him, not entirely satisfied. And for Catherine Holloway, there are rumors, about the two of you. Heat rose in David's face, but he maintained eye contact. Mrs. Holloway and I want the same thing to protect what makes these scholarships special. That's all there is to it. Maria's smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded, accepting his answer for now. Just be careful. The world she lives in plays by different rules than ours. I've watched the foundation politics for years. They can be brutal. The warning echoed Lily's earlier caution, amplifying David's unease. Was he naive to think he could step into Catherine's world even temporarily without consequences? That he could serve as her ally without becoming entangled in dynamics he didn't fully understand? These questions lingered as he compiled the meeting notes that evening, organizing them into themes Catherine could use in her proposal. Success stories balanced against ongoing challenges. Statistics given life through personal narratives. Clear evidence that partial scholarships would create burdens many families simply couldn't bear, forcing talented children to decline opportunities they had rightfully earned. The second meeting on Sunday yielded similar insights, strengthening their case. By Sunday evening, David had a comprehensive document ready to share with Catherine, 30 pages of testimonies, data points, and specific recommendations drawn directly from the family's experiences. They met at her home to review the findings, spreading papers across her kitchen island, working side by side to shape the material into a compelling presentation for the board. The ease between them had deepened since their dinner, professional collaboration, blending seamlessly with personal connection in a way that felt both natural and precarious. As the evening progressed, Catherine shared more about the board's internal politics, the alliances and rivalries that would influence the upcoming vote. David listened carefully, absorbing the complexities of a world so different from his own, yet increasingly familiar through her eyes. It was nearly midnight when they finished the presentation, taking final shape. Powerful, data-driven, but ultimately human in its focus. Catherine leaned back, exhaustion and satisfaction mingling in her expression. This is exactly what we needed. You've given these families a voice they wouldn't have had otherwise. David shook his head slightly. They've always had voices. What they needed was someone willing to listen. Catherine's gaze softened, something unspoken passing between them. Her hand reached across the counter, hesitant, then settled on his. Thank you seems inadequate for what you've done, not just for the foundation, but for me, for reminding me why this work matters. The warmth of her touch, the sincerity in her voice collapsed the careful distance David had been maintaining. Without fully intending it, he found himself leaning closer, drawn by a connection that had grown beyond alliance into something he wasn't yet ready to name. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Then Catherine's phone buzzed sharply on the counter, breaking the spell. She withdrew her hand to check the message, her expression shifting from openness to concern in an instant. It's Richard Thornfield, she said, her voice tightening. He wants to move the board meeting up to Wednesday. Claims there's an urgent donor situation that can't wait. David recognized the tactic immediately. They know we're gathering support. They're trying to cut us off before we're ready. Catherine nodded grimly. Exactly. And as chair, I can delay, but not refuse. We have 2 days, not a week, to finalize everything. The change accelerated their timeline, adding pressure to an already intensive process. David adjusted his work schedule, taking personal days to help Catherine refine the presentation. They moved with focused urgency, knowing that the foundation's future, and by extension, the futures of students like Lily, hung in the balance. Tuesday evening found them in Catherine's home office making final adjustments to their strategy. The presentation was complete, the data compelling, the testimonies powerful. But a nagging doubt had taken root in David's mind, growing stronger as the board meeting approached. We're missing something, he said, finally pushing away from the computer where they'd been working. All of this is important, the numbers, the stories, the impact assessment, but it's still abstract. The board members who oppose you have already made up their minds. They'll listen politely, then vote their interests. Catherine leaned back in her chair, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. What are you suggesting? David paced the room, organizing his thoughts. They need to see what these scholarships mean, not just hear about it. They need to face the families, the children, to witness firsthand what their decision will affect. A slow smile spread across Catherine's face as she caught his meaning. You want to bring the scholarship families to the board meeting? Not all of them, David clarified. Just a few who represent different aspects of the program. Maria Santos, whose daughter is now applying to Ivy League schools. The Jacksons, whose son went from nearly dropping out of public school to thriving at Westridge. And Lily Catherine finished softly, because she embodies the future these scholarships make possible. David nodded, though the thought of involving his daughter directly in this conflict stirred his protective instincts. If she wants to, I won't push her into the spotlight if she's not comfortable with it. Catherine crossed the room to stand before him, her expression serious. This could work, David, but it's also risky. Richard and the others won't appreciate being ambushed. They could see it as manipulation, could resent being put on the spot. Are you prepared for that? The question contained layers of meaning beyond the immediate strategy. Was he prepared for potential backlash? For what might happen if they lost this fight? For how it might affect Lily's standing at school? His relationship with Catherine, their respective places in worlds that were never meant to overlap. David met her gaze steadily. Some things are worth fighting for even when the odds aren't in your favor. You taught me that. Something shifted in Catherine's eyes, a recognition perhaps, or a decision reached. Without warning, she closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. It was brief but unmistakable in its intent, a crossing of boundaries they had been circling for days. When she pulled back, her expression held both certainty and question. I'm sorry if that was presumptuous, but I've wanted to do that since the night on the balcony. David's heart hammered against his ribs, surprise mingling with a recognition that had been building since their first real conversation. I have too, but Catherine, our worlds are so different. She shook her head slightly, cutting off his protest. Different, yes, but not as different as everyone thinks. We both know what it means to build a life after loss. We both understand sacrifice, and we both care about creating opportunity for children who deserve it. Her hands found his fingers intertwining. I'm not asking for promises, David. I'm just acknowledging what's happening between us. Whatever comes next with the board, with the foundation, with us, I want it to be honest. The simple truth of her words pierced through the complications, the concerns, the cautionary voices that had been echoing in his mind. What was developing between them was real, unexpected, perhaps improbable, but genuine. To deny it would be its own kind of dishonesty. David's response was to draw her closer, his kiss and answer more eloquent than words. For a moment, the looming board meeting, the foundation, politics, the worlds that separated them, all of it receded, leaving only this connection, this recognition of something rare and worth protecting. When they finally returned to the presentation, it was with renewed purpose and clarity. They would bring select families to the board meeting. They would make their case not just with data and testimonies, but with living proof of the scholarship program's impact. And they would face whatever consequences came together. Wednesday morning dawned clear and cold, the first truly autumnal day of the season. David woke early, his mind already racing through the day ahead. Lily had eagerly agreed to speak at the board meeting, her initial nervousness giving way to determination once she understood what was at stake. Now she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the notes she had prepared, her face a study in concentration. David watched her from the doorway, pride and anxiety warring in his chest. She looked so grown up, so capable in her school uniform, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her posture straight and confident. Yet she was still just 11, stepping into a conflict created by adults with agendas she couldn't fully comprehend. You okay, kiddo? He asked, moving to start the coffee maker. You know you don't have to do this if you're having second thoughts. Lily looked up, her expression serious beyond her years. I want to do it. Mrs. Holloway is fighting for kids like me. The least I can do is tell the board what the scholarship really means. Her certainty settled something in David's chest. If Lily could face this challenge with such clarity, so could he. He had spent too many years playing it safe, avoiding risks that might disrupt the careful balance of their lives. But some battles were worth fighting even when victory wasn't guaranteed. Catherine had shown him that not just through her words, but through her willingness to stand up for what she believed in, regardless of the personal cost. The foundation's offices occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the Pearl District, exposed brick and steel beams, contrasting with modern furnishings and state-of-the-art technology. David and Lily arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, joining Catherine in a small conference room where the other selected families were already gathered. Maria Santos greeted them warmly, her daughter Valeria standing tall beside her, a poised young woman of 16 whose academic achievements had already earned her early interest from college recruiters. The Jackson family was there too, Robert and Anna with their son Marcus, whose artistic talents had flourished under the guidance of West Ridge's exceptional arts program. Catherine moved among them, thanking each family for coming, reviewing what to expect from the board meeting. She had warned them all that there might be resistance, even hostility from certain board members, but she had also promised that their voices would be heard, their experiences valued in a way that spreadsheets and policy proposals could never capture. When the time came to enter the boardroom, David felt Lily's hand slip into his, a gesture she had mostly outgrown but sought now for reassurance. He squeezed gently, drawing strength from her trust as much as giving support. The boardroom itself exuded power, a long table of polished walnut leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 7 people were already seated, their conversations dying away as Catherine led the unexpected delegation into the room. Richard Thornfield's expression shifted from surprise to poorly concealed anger. Eleanor Whitman's perfectly manicured nails drummed once against the table before she controlled the tell. James Curtis studied the newcomers with the calculating gaze of someone assessing variables in an equation. Catherine took her place at the head of the table, her posture impeccable, her voice steady as she made introductions. Before we begin our formal agenda, I've invited several of our scholarship families to share their experiences with the board. As we consider potential changes to the program, I believe it's essential we understand the real-world impact of our decisions. Richard Thornfield's objection was immediate, his tone sharp beneath a veneer of professional concern. This is highly irregular, Catherine. Board meetings follow established protocols for a reason. These families should have been scheduled for the community input session next month. Catherine met his gaze evenly. These families are the heart of what we do, Richard. If we can't make time to hear from them directly before making decisions that affect their children's futures, then we've lost sight of our purpose. The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. For a moment, David thought Thornfield might refuse outright, might use his authority as chairman to shut down Catherine's unorthodox approach. But such a move would reveal too much, would make explicit the priorities he preferred to keep veiled in concerns about sustainability and broader impact. Instead, Thornfield settled back in his chair, his smile not reaching his eyes. Of course, we're always eager to hear from our scholarship recipients, though I must note for the record that this represents a very small sample of the families we serve. Catherine nodded, conceding the point, while yielding nothing of substance. Absolutely, which is why we've also prepared a comprehensive report based on interviews with many more families, which you'll all receive today. But first, I'd like you to hear directly from those who have joined us. She gestured to Maria Santos, who stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to advocacy. For the next 40 minutes, the families shared their stories, not with rehearsed speeches or emotional appeals, but with straightforward accounts of what the Holloway scholarships had meant in their lives. They spoke of doors opened, of opportunities seized, of futures transformed, not just by financial support, but by the comprehensive nature of the program. When it was Lily's turn to speak, David felt his chest tighten with a mixture of pride and protective concern. She stood straight, her voice clear, despite her youth. Before I got the Holloway scholarship, I thought being an astrophysicist was just a dream, something to wish for, not something I could actually become. Her gaze moved deliberately around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. But now I know it can be real. Not just because of the classes or the equipment at Westridge, but because the scholarship means my dad doesn't have to work extra shifts to pay for my school supplies. It means I can join the astronomy club and the science Olympiad without worrying about fees. It means I belong there, really belong, not just as someone who got lucky, but as someone who earned my place. The simplicity of her words, the unaffected dignity with which she delivered them, created a stillness in the room that even Thornfield couldn't break with his practiced skepticism. In that moment, David saw Catherine's strategy for what it truly was, not manipulation, but truth-telling in its most powerful form. The board members could debate policies and percentages all day, but they couldn't easily dismiss the living results of their foundation's work standing before them. As the families concluded their presentations and took seats along the wall, Catherine moved smoothly into the formal portion of the meeting. The comprehensive report was distributed. The data presented the options for the scholarship program's future laid out with meticulous attention to both financial realities and human impact. The discussion that followed was tense, at times heated. Thornfield and his allies argued forcefully for the partial scholarship model, citing donor preferences and the opportunity to extend the foundation's reach. Catherine and the supportive board members countered with evidence of the full scholarship's transformative effects, the false economy of partial funding that left families struggling with hidden costs, the risk of creating opportunities on paper that couldn't be accessed in practice. Throughout it all, David watched the dynamic with growing understanding. This wasn't just about funding models or educational philosophy. It was about power, who held it, who deserved it, who got to determine how it was used. Catherine was fighting not just for scholarship dollars, but for a vision of philanthropy that centered the needs of recipients rather than the egos of donors. When the time came for the vote, the room grew still. Each board member stated their position in turn, their voices echoing in the hushed space. 4 votes for maintaining the full scholarship program. 3 votes for transition to the partial model. Catherine's side had won, but narrowly, with divisions that promised future battles. As the meeting adjourned, Thornfield approached Catherine, his smile thin and cold. "You won today, Catherine, but using children as props won't work twice. The donor landscape is changing. Eventually, you'll have to change with it." Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "They weren't props, Richard. They're the reason we exist. Something you might want to remember the next time you're at a fundraising dinner talking about the foundation's impact." The exchange, brief but loaded with subtext, confirmed what David had suspected. Today's victory was real but temporary. The underlying conflict remained unresolved, the competing visions for the foundation's future still at odds. But for now, for this year at least, the full scholarships were secure. For families like his, for children like Lily, that mattered more than the politics behind it. As they left the foundation offices, stepping into the autumn sunshine, Lily's hand found his again. "We did it, Dad. We helped save the scholarships." David smiled down at her, his heart full. "You did it, kiddo. You showed them exactly why this program matters." Catherine joined them on the sidewalk, professional reserve, giving way to genuine relief now that they were beyond the boardroom scrutiny. That was, she shook her head, searching for words. "I've been in philanthropy for 15 years, and I've never seen anything as powerful as what happened in that room today. You all changed minds in ways my reports and proposals never could." Her gaze met David's gratitude, and something deeper passing between them. Then she knelt slightly to address Lily directly. "You were extraordinary. The way you spoke about belonging, about earning your place, that's exactly what Thomas and I hoped for when we created these scholarships. Not charity, but opportunity. Not a gift, but a recognition of potential." Lily beamed under the praise, her usual reserve melting away. "Does this mean the scholarships are safe now for all the kids?" Catherine's smile held both triumph and caution. "For this year, yes, and we've bought time to build more support for the future." That's a victory worth celebrating. As they stood there in the autumn light, the mechanic, his daughter, and the woman who had drawn them into a world they never expected to enter, David felt a shift in his understanding of what was possible. The barriers between their worlds hadn't disappeared. The differences in their circumstances hadn't magically resolved, but they had found common ground in what mattered most: the belief that opportunities should be earned by talent and determination, not limited by circumstances of birth or financial status. Whatever came next for the foundation, for Lily's education, for the connection growing between him and Catherine, would build on that shared conviction. It wasn't a fairy tale ending with all conflicts resolved and all futures secured. It was something better, a beginning based on truth, on respect, on the recognition that dignity wasn't something granted by others, but carried from within and recognized by those who knew its worth.